The desert was silent under the silver glow of the moon. A cold wind moved across the empty land, carrying the dry scent of dust. Far away, in a small military observation post, 2 soldiers sat inside a cramped metal cabin. They were tired, waiting for the long night to end. Then, the ground shook. At first, it was faint like a distant rumble of thunder, but the noise grew louder until the entire building seemed to vibrate. The soldiers jumped to their feet, rushing outside. In the dark sky, a bright streak of light tore through the stars. It moved too fast to be a plane, and too low to be a meteor. The streak burned orange and white, and a trail of sparks followed behind it. One soldier reached for the radio. Command. This is Station Delta. We have something incoming. Very large. Before he could finish, the object shot over their heads with a deafening roar. It slammed into the desert floor beyond the distant dunes. The ground trembled again, and a dull explosion echoed through the air. Within minutes, the base was awake. Trucks and armored vehicles rolled out toward the crash site. Searchlights cut across the sand, scanning for danger. When they reached the site, the soldiers saw a massive crater in the earth. Steam rose from it, and strange metal fragments glimmered under the lights. The air smelled of burning stone and something unfamiliar like melted iron, mixed with sharp chemicals. Then came the sound. It was not the hiss of fire, nor the crackle of breaking rock. It was a voice, low and deep. The sound rose from inside the crater. The soldiers tensed, gripping their weapons. A shadow moved in the steam. Slowly, a figure emerged. Gasps passed through the crowd. She was unlike anything they had ever seen. A woman, but far taller than any human, her head easily twice the height of a man's. Her skin had a faint silver tone, and her hair fell like dark rivers over her shoulders. She wore strange, torn armor that seemed to be made of smooth, seamless plates. One of her arms hung limp at her side, and she moved with difficulty, stumbling in the sand. The Giantess looked around, confused, as if searching for something familiar. Her eyes, large and bright, reflected the searchlights. They did not hold the wild rage the soldiers expected. Instead, they were filled with pain and fear. But fear spread faster among the humans. "Stay back," a soldier shouted. Weapons clicked into ready position. The Giantess stopped and raised her hand slightly, as if to show she meant no harm. She spoke in a language none of them understood. The words were strange and flowing, almost musical, but her tone sounded like a plea. The soldiers did not lower their weapons. More trucks arrived, and soon the site was filled with military personnel. A tall officer stepped forward, his face hard and unreadable. He ordered a containment unit to move in. The Giantess stepped back, unsure of their intentions. Her foot pressed against a large piece of her shattered ship. She looked down at it, then back at the soldiers, her expression tightening as if she knew she could not repair it. The containment unit advanced with large nets and poles. The Giantess glanced around, but there was nowhere to run. Her injured legs slowed her, and the sand was soft beneath her feet. One soldier moved closer than the rest, holding a device that emitted a loud pulse. The sound made her flinch and cover her ears. She let out a low cry, then stumbled forward as the nets were thrown over her. It took 10 men to pull her down to her knees. The soldiers tied thick restraints around her wrists and ankles, though she did not fight back. She looked from face to face, her expression a mix of confusion and sadness. The officer gave a short command. A transport vehicle built for carrying heavy equipment was brought forward. They loaded her into it carefully, as if moving a dangerous machine. But Daniel, a young technician assigned to check the crash debris, noticed something different. He had been standing near the edge of the crater, collecting fragments of metal for analysis. When the soldiers secured her, Daniel's eyes met hers. For a brief moment, he expected to see anger or hostility. Instead, he saw something that made him hesitate. It was the look of someone who had lost everything. As the vehicle doors closed, sealing her inside, Daniel glanced at the wreckage again. Among the twisted metal, he found what looked like a piece of a broken control panel. On it, a small light flickered weakly. accompanied by a soft sound almost like a voice recorded on a loop. The words were not in English, but the tone was calm, not threatening. Daniel picked it up carefully. The light blinked once, then went dark. The convoy began moving toward the nearest secure facility. The soldiers inside were silent, each one keeping their thoughts to themselves. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, the wind erasing the crash site's traces. But Daniel could not stop thinking about her eyes, her voice, and that small fragment of technology. Something told him that whatever the truth was, it was not what everyone assumed out far away, in cities lit by streetlights and glowing screens. The news began to spread. People saw blurry images and shaky video clips taken by soldiers. They saw the tall alien woman, her head bowed, walking between armed guards. The headlines used words like threat and unknown danger. Fear began to grow. Daniel didn't know it yet, but the moment he looked into her eyes would be the start of something much larger, a choice that would decide both her fate and his. The transport convoy reached the edge of the city just before dawn. The streets were empty, and the air was cool. The lead truck slowed as they approached a tall, windowless structure surrounded by high walls topped with sensors. This was Facility 9, a secure military research center known for holding dangerous technology and rare specimens from space. The gates opened with a heavy mechanical sound, and the vehicles drove inside. Bright spotlights lit the yard, and a team of scientists in white coats waited near the entrance. Behind them stood more soldiers, their faces serious, inside the transport vehicle. The alien Giantess sat silently. Her hands and feet were still, bound by thick restraints. She did not speak, but her eyes moved, taking in everything: the walls, the lights, the people. Her calmness made the soldiers even more uneasy. When the doors opened, the soldiers gestured for her to step out. She moved slowly, her injured leg making it hard to walk. Each step left a deep mark in the dirt. She was led toward a large steel door that slid open to reveal a wide hallway. The hall was cold, the walls made of smooth gray metal. Cameras followed their movement from above. They passed through several security checkpoints before reaching a massive reinforced cell. The cell had a high ceiling and walls lined with thick energy barriers. There was a single bed large enough for her size, a table, and nothing else. The soldiers removed the restraints and quickly stepped back. The door closed with a heavy clang, sealing her inside. Daniel, the young technician from the crash site, arrived at the facility shortly after. He carried a box containing fragments from the alien ship, including the small panel with the faint voice recording. He had been ordered to deliver the box to Lab 3 for examination, but his curiosity kept pulling his attention back toward the cell. From a distance, he could see her sitting on the bed, her back straight, her head slightly lowered. She looked tired but not defeated. The soft silver glow of her skin was clearer now under the bright lights. In the control room, several scientists were already studying her movements through live video feeds. She hasn't tried to attack anyone, one scientist said. No signs of aggression. Another shook his head. That doesn't mean she's harmless. Her size alone makes her a threat. Daniel stayed quiet, but the words bothered him. He remembered the moment in the crater when she had raised her hands in peace. He remembered her voice, though he hadn't understood it. Later that day, Daniel was sent to repair a security panel outside her cell. It was his first time being so close to her without a crowd of soldiers. He tried not to look directly at her, but he could feel her eyes on him. Finally, he glanced up. She was watching him with a steady gaze, her head tilted slightly, as if she was trying to read his thoughts. Daniel hesitated, then gave a small nod. To his surprise, she returned the gesture, slow and deliberate. For a brief moment, there was no fear between them, just quiet understanding. Over the next 2 days, the scientists ran several tests. They scanned her with large machines, took samples from her armor, and recorded her voice. Every time they tried to speak to her, she answered in her own language. No one understood, and most of the team grew impatient. One evening, Daniel passed by the observation room and saw her sitting cross-legged on the floor of her cell. She was holding a small piece of metal from her broken armor. Her fingers traced patterns on it, almost like writing. He felt an urge to speak to her, even if she couldn't understand. "You're not here to hurt us, are you?" he whispered. Knowing she couldn't hear through the barrier. To his surprise, she looked up sharply. As if she had sensed his voice, she didn't answer, but her expression softened. That night, Daniel decided to examine the recording from the crash site more closely. In his small workspace, he connected the broken panel to the lab's translation software. The voice played again, soft and steady, in a pattern of sounds he had never heard before. The translator failed at first, but then picked up a few basic words: peace, danger, refuge. Daniel leaned back in his chair. She had been asking for help. He knew this was important, but the officials leading the project were focused only on proving she was a threat. If he told them now, they might dismiss it. He needed more proof, enough that they couldn't ignore. The next morning, the facility was buzzing with activity. News had reached the outside world that the alien's trial would happen in just a few days. Most people already believed she was dangerous. The few voices calling for caution were drowned out by fear. Daniel felt the pressure growing. The more he watched her, the more certain he became that she was not the enemy. But the decision was not his to make. That evening, as he walked past her cell again, she stood close to the barrier. For the first time, she spoke to him directly. The words were in her language, but her tone was calm and steady, almost questioning. Daniel stopped. "I wish I could understand you," he said quietly. She studied him for a moment, then pointed to herself and said a single word. It was clear she was giving him her name. He tried repeating it, awkwardly. She gave a faint smile and nodded. That small exchange stayed with him long after he left the facility for the night. The Giantess was no longer just a strange being from the sky. She was someone with a name, a story, and a voice that no one else seemed willing to hear. Daniel didn't know how, but he promised himself he would find a way to understand her before it was too late. 3 days had passed since the alien Giantess was locked inside Facility 9. The air around the base felt heavy, as if everyone was waiting for something they could not stop. Soldiers spoke in short sentences. Scientists worked without smiles. And the news channels outside repeated the same story again and again. The alien would face judgment. A special court was being prepared inside the Capitol. It was not an ordinary courtroom. This one was surrounded by high security walls, armored vehicles, and guards at every entrance. The hearing would be broadcast to the world. The government claimed it was for transparency, but Daniel knew the truth. Most people already believed she was dangerous. In the control room of Facility 9, an official in a dark suit announced the schedule. "The trial isn't today's. She will be moved tomorrow morning. Until then, we need all final reports completed." Daniel listened quietly, pretending to focus on the broken panel from her ship. In reality, his thoughts were elsewhere. The translation software had already given him several clear words from her recording piece. Refuge, danger. It was not enough to fully prove her innocence, but it was a start. He needed more, and fast. That night, Daniel stayed late in the lab. He replayed the recording again and again, adjusting the settings to pick up even the faintest sound. After hours of work, another word came through: destroyed. He wrote them all down: peace, refuge, danger, destroyed. It was enough to tell a story. She had come seeking safety because her world was gone, and there was something dangerous out there. But without full sentences, others might still doubt. Daniel rubbed his eyes and leaned back. He knew the officials running the trial wouldn't care unless he had undeniable proof. And if the transport left tomorrow morning, he might never get another chance. The next day began with heavy clouds. A cold wind moved through the yard as soldiers prepared the armored transport that would take her to the Capitol. Daniel stood near the back, pretending to check the vehicle's systems. From the corner of his eye, he saw her being led out of the facility. Her hands and feet were bound again, though she did not resist. Her head was slightly lowered, her steps slow. Cameras flashed from behind the outer fence, capturing every second. For the waiting public. As she passed, Her gaze shifted toward Daniel for just a moment. It was not fear in her eyes, only quiet patience, as if she knew the decision was no longer hers to make. Inside the vehicle, she sat in silence. 2 guards were stationed across from her, their weapons ready. Daniel rode in a separate truck, following behind. The convoy moved through empty back roads to avoid large crowds. When they reached the capital, the streets were lined with barriers and soldiers. Curious onlookers stood behind the fences, holding up devices to record the moment. Some shouted in anger, others in disbelief. The Giantess was led into the courthouse through a side entrance, away from the noise. Inside, the main chamber was large and cold. Rows of seats were filled with officials, scientists, and military officers. At the far end, a raised platform held the judges. Large screens displayed her image for everyone watching around the world. Daniel was given a seat near the technical team. From here, he could see her clearly. She stood in a special enclosed space large enough to hold her height. The walls of the enclosure were made of thick glass. The lead judge began speaking, listing the charges: unauthorized entry into Earth's territory, destruction of property, potential threat to human life. When they asked if she had anything to say, she spoke in her language. The sounds were calm and slow, but to most listeners they meant nothing. People murmured in the audience. A scientist from Facility 9 stepped forward to present evidence. He showed images of the crater, fragments of her ship, and reports that claimed her technology could be dangerous. No mention was made of her peaceful behavior or the words Daniel had found. Daniel's chest tightened. He could feel the decision forming in the room before it was even spoken. During a short break, Daniel made a choice. He walked quickly to the small table where the translation equipment was set up. For demonstration, he connected his own device, loaded with the recording from the crash site. When the judge called for the next piece of evidence, Daniel stepped forward before anyone could stop him. "This is a message recovered from her ship," Daniel said, his voice steady but loud enough to carry. "It has been partially translated." The recording played. The strange but gentle voice filled the chamber. Words appeared on the screen as the translator processed them: peace, refuge, danger, destroyed. The room fell silent. Daniel explained. She was not attacking. She was fleeing. Her planet is gone, and she came here for safety. The danger she spoke of may still be out there. Murmurs swept through the crowd. The judges whispered to one another. The military officials looked uneasy. The lead judge finally said, "This is unexpected information, but without full translation, we cannot confirm her intentions. The trial will continue tomorrow, and final judgment will be made then." The session ended, and she was led back to her enclosure under heavy guard. Daniel felt the weight of time pressing on him. He had delayed the decision, but only for a day. If he could not get the full translation by then, everything would be lost. As she was taken past him, she met his eyes again. This time, there was a spark of hope, small but real. Daniel knew what he had to do. Tomorrow would decide everything. That night, the city outside the courthouse was alive with voices. News reporters stood on every street corner, their cameras pointing at the dark building where the alien Giantess was being held. People argued in cafes, homes, and on screens. Some believed Daniel's evidence was enough to stop the trial. Others said it was a trick, and she was still a threat. Inside the secure holding facility, the Giantess sat alone in a reinforced room. She rested her back against the wall, eyes closed. Outside her door, 2 guards stood watch, their hands resting on their weapons. Daniel was in a small technical room across the street, working under dim lights. He had been given permission to continue studying the recording, but only until morning. The judge's order was clear: if he could not produce a complete translation, the trial would resume as planned, and the decision might go against her. He stared at the computer screen, listening to the voice over and over. The translator program processed the sound slowly, picking up small fragments. His notebook was already filled with words: peace, refuge, danger, destroyed. Now, a few new ones appeared, many, coming, warning. Daniel's mind began to piece them together. If he was right, she had been sending a message to anyone who could hear it, telling them her world had been destroyed, warning that something was coming, asking for a place to stay. But there were still long gaps between the words. If he could not fill them in, others might say he was guessing. Daniel leaned back in his chair, thinking about the moment at the crash site when she had looked at him. Her expression had not been one of anger. It had been the look of someone trying to reach out. An idea formed in his mind. He left the lab and walked quickly to the facility where she was kept. At the checkpoint, a guard stopped him. "You can't be here. She's under strict watch." "I'm authorized," Daniel said, holding up his ID. "I just need 5 minutes." The guard hesitated, then allowed him through. Inside, Daniel approached her room. The thick glass barrier separated them, but she noticed him right away. She stood slowly, moving closer, her eyes curious. Daniel tapped the side of his head, then pointed toward the small translator device in his hand. "I need your help," he said, speaking slowly. She tilted her head, as if trying to understand. He played the broken recording from her ship, then pointed to her and made a gesture for speaking. She seemed to understand. She began to repeat the message, her voice steady and clear. The translator worked quickly this time. Words began to appear on Daniel's small screen. His heart raced as he read them. "This is Captain Aethera of the Alindra. My home is destroyed. The enemy that came for us is many. They will come for others. I seek refuge. I bring warning. I am not your enemy." Daniel stared at the words, hardly believing it. This was it, the full message. She was not only innocent. She had been trying to warn them about a larger threat. But before he could save the file, the door behind him opened. Two military officers entered, their expressions sharp. "What are you doing here?" one demanded. Daniel closed the device quickly, confirming translation progress. He said, trying to keep his voice calm, "You have until morning." The other officer said, "Leave now." Daniel walked out without arguing, but his mind was racing. If those officers suspected what he had, they might try to block him from presenting it. He needed to get the information to the court without interference. Back in his lab, he saved the translation to multiple drives. He also printed a physical copy, just in case. The words looked simple on paper, but Daniel knew they could change everything. The hours passed slowly. Outside, the wind grew stronger, rattling the windows. Inside, Daniel kept going over the translation, making sure there were no errors. Each time he read it, he felt more certain that she was telling the truth. By morning, the city was restless. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse again, some holding signs, others shouting. Reporters spoke into microphones, repeating the question everyone wanted answered: would the alien be spared or condemned? Daniel carried the translation in his bag, his steps quick. At the courthouse entrance, a guard checked his papers twice before letting him in. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The Giantess stood in her enclosure, calm but watchful. The judges took their seats, and the trial resumed. Before the prosecution could speak, Daniel stepped forward. "Your Honors, I have completed the full translation of the message recovered from her ship," he said. The lead judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Daniel connected his device to the main screen. The voice of the Giantess filled the room again, but this time the words appeared clearly beneath it. "This is Captain Aethera of the Alindra. My home is destroyed. The enemy that came for us is many. They will come for others. I seek refuge. I bring warning. I am not your enemy." The room was silent for several moments. One of the judges leaned forward. "You claim this is accurate?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "I confirmed it directly with her last night." Murmurs rose in the audience. Some people looked shocked, others doubtful, but a few faces softened, seeing her in a different light for the first time. The lead judge tapped the table. "We will review this evidence carefully. Until then, the prisoner will remain in custody." It wasn't the full victory Daniel had hoped for, but it was a step forward. As she was led away, Aethera glanced at him, and for a moment her eyes held something more than hope - trust. Daniel knew the fight wasn't over. The judges had the truth now, but whether they would act on it was another matter. And somewhere, beyond the stars, the enemy she spoke of might already be on their way. Tomorrow's decision could change the future of both their worlds. The courthouse was quiet that night, but it was not the quiet of peace. It was the tense silence of something about to happen. The trial had paused for the judges to review Daniel's translation, but not everyone wanted to wait for their decision. In a small, dimly lit office on the upper floor, two military officers spoke in low voices. "If the court believes that translation, she'll be released," one said. "We can't allow that. She's too dangerous to be free." "What's the plan?" the other asked. "We remove her tonight. No trial, no release. It'll look like an accident." They nodded to each other, unaware that a janitor passing by had overheard part of their conversation. The janitor, unsure what to do, later mentioned it quietly to one of the courthouse technicians, a friend of Daniel's. An hour later, Daniel was in his small apartment across the street from the courthouse, going over his notes again, when the phone rang. "You need to get down here," the technician said quickly. "I think they're going to execute her before the trial ends." Daniel felt his chest tighten. "When?" "Soon. They're moving a vehicle to the side entrance." Now, Daniel didn't stop to think. He grabbed his jacket and the printed translation, then ran into the cold night air. The streets were empty, but the courthouse was still lit. He slipped in through the back entrance where his technician friend was waiting. "They're taking her out the side door," the friend whispered. 3 guards, maybe more." Daniel hurried through the narrow hallways, trying to stay unseen. His mind raced. If they moved her, she might be gone before morning. The trial would mean nothing. When he reached the lower holding area, he saw 2 soldiers unlocking the reinforced cell door. The Giantess was standing inside, her hands bound again. She looked at the soldiers without fear, but also without understanding what was about to happen. Daniel stepped forward before they could pull her out. "Wait, the judges haven't made their decision. This is above your clearance," one soldier said sharply. "Go back to your station. She's not a threat," Daniel insisted. "You've seen the evidence. That's not our concern," the soldier replied, motioning for the others to move her. Daniel's pulse quickened. He looked at Aethera, then at the soldiers. "If you're taking her out of here, you'll have to go through me." The soldiers stared at him in disbelief. "You're making a mistake," one warned. Daniel didn't move. He planted himself between them and the doorway. "So are you?" he said quietly. One of the soldiers raised his communicator to call for backup, but Aethera suddenly spoke, her voice low and steady in her own language. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. It was a warning. A loud metallic sound came from the far hallway, footsteps, heavy and fast. More soldiers were coming. Daniel's mind worked quickly. If they stayed here, she would be taken. But if they moved now, maybe they could get her out. He turned to the technician who had followed him. "Unlock the service gate." "That's crazy," the technician whispered. "They'll catch us." "Just do it," Daniel said. The technician hesitated, then ran toward the control panel. The cell door slid open, and Aethera stepped out. She looked down at Daniel, her eyes questioning. He motioned toward the side hall. "Come with me." They moved quickly through the narrow corridors. Alarms began to ring. Someone had noticed the open cell. Daniel led them to the service gate, where the technician was frantically overriding the locks. "Almost there," the technician said. A voice shouted from behind them, "Stop." Daniel turned. 3 soldiers were running toward them. He grabbed a metal pipe from the wall and swung it at the floor, making a loud clang to draw their attention away from the technician. The lock clicked open. The gate swung outward into the dark street. "Go," Daniel said. Aethera ducked under the low frame and stepped outside. Her long stride covered the ground quickly. Daniel and the technician followed close behind. They moved through the empty side streets, the sound of alarms echoing behind them. Aethera glanced around, clearly trying to understand the layout of this strange city. She didn't speak, but Daniel could tell she understood the urgency. After several blocks, they ducked into an abandoned warehouse. The air inside was cold and smelled of rust. Daniel leaned against the wall, catching his breath. That won't stop them for long, the technician said, looking toward the street. Daniel nodded. We just need until morning. If we can make it to the trial, the evidence will clear her. Aethera stepped closer, lowering herself slightly so her eyes were level with his. She said a few words in her language, her tone soft but certain. Daniel wished he could answer her properly. We'll get you to safety, he said. Outside, faint lights began to move in the distance. The search had already begun. Daniel knew the next few hours would decide everything. If they were caught now, it would be over. But if they could reach the courthouse at dawn, the truth might finally be heard. The night passed in uneasy silence inside the abandoned warehouse. Every sound outside, distant sirens, the hum of a passing patrol vehicle made Daniel tense. Aethera remained calm, though she rarely moved from her spot near the broken window. Her large eyes watched the street as if she could sense danger before it arrived. Daniel didn't sleep. He kept glancing at the small clock on his communicator. Dawn was only an hour away. If they could reach the courthouse by then, the judges would see the full translation before any military action could stop them. The technician paced near the door, whispering, "They'll have checkpoints everywhere by now. We won't make it walking." Daniel thought for a moment. There's an old tram line that passes near the courthouse. It's not in use anymore, but the tracks are still clear. If we follow it, we can avoid most of the patrols. Aethera tilted her head slightly, watching him as he spoke. She couldn't understand the words, but she seemed to understand the urgency in his tone. They left before the first light of morning, slipping out through a side exit of the warehouse. The city was quiet, the air cool. They moved quickly along narrow alleys until they reached the rusted tram tracks. The path was uneven, but it wound between old storage yards and empty lots, places the military was less likely to search. But their luck didn't hold. Halfway to the courthouse, the low hum of engines grew louder. A patrol vehicle turned the corner ahead, its headlights sweeping across the tracks. "Go back." The technician has to know, Daniel said, gripping his bag tightly. "We're too close." The vehicle stopped. Soldiers stepped out, weapons raised. "Stop where you are," one of them shouted. Aethera froze, her tall frame towering above Daniel. He could feel her tension, but she didn't move to fight. The soldiers advanced, their boots crunching on gravel. Daniel's mind raced. If they were taken here, everything would be lost. He stepped forward, putting himself directly between the soldiers and Aethera. "You're not taking her," he said. Loudly, the lead soldier frowned. "You think you can stop us? Step aside." "No," Daniel said firmly. His voice shook slightly, but he didn't back away. "If you fire, you'll have to fire through me." The soldiers hesitated. One of them glanced toward the nearest security camera mounted on a street pole. The red light was on, it was recording. Daniel realized the feed might be going to the public security network. If so, people could be watching this right now. He raised his voice, speaking clearly. "She's not your enemy. She came here to warn us. Her planet is gone. Something is coming for us next. If you harm her, you're throwing away the only warning we have." The soldiers didn't move. One shifted uncomfortably, but the leader kept his weapon raised. From behind Daniel, Aethera spoke. Her voice was deep and calm, carrying across the street. The words were in her language, but they were filled with dignity. The soldiers looked at each other, uncertain. Then the faint sound of voices came from the soldier's communicator, distant but urgent. Daniel caught a few words. "Lift feed, crowd forming." He understood instantly. People were watching. "Go ahead," Daniel said to the soldiers. "Pull the trigger. Show the world you're willing to destroy someone who came for peace." The leader's jaw tightened. His weapon wavered slightly. He muttered something to the others, and they lowered their guns. "Orders changed," he said reluctantly. "We're taking all of you to the courthouse." Daniel let out a slow breath. It wasn't complete freedom, but it was better than being dragged to an unknown fate. They were escorted the rest of the way under heavy guard, but now, everywhere they passed, Daniel saw people standing on sidewalks, recording with their devices. Some called out questions, others simply stared in silence. The moment had already spread far beyond this street. when they reached the courthouse. The judges were already inside. The room was crowded, filled with officials, reporters, and citizens who had managed to get in. The giant screens displayed the live feed from earlier. Daniel standing in front of Aethera, refusing to move. The lead judge called for quiet. "We have seen new events this morning that must be considered along with yesterday's evidence." Daniel was asked to speak. He stepped forward, placing the printed translation on the table. "She is Captain Aethera of the Alindra. She came here because her world was destroyed. She warns that the same enemy will come for us. If we harm her, we are not only destroying someone innocent, we are destroying our chance to prepare for what's coming." The judge looked at Aethera, then at the military officials, then back to Daniel. "This court will take this into serious consideration. A final decision will be announced within the hour." Daniel returned to his seat. Aethera's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, she smiled, a small, almost unnoticeable curve of her lips, but one filled with meaning. The hour ahead would decide everything. The courthouse was silent except for the quiet murmur of people shifting in their seats. The judges had left to deliberate an hour ago, leaving Daniel, Aethera, and the technician waiting under the watch of 2 guards. Outside, the city had changed. News channels were showing the morning's footage again, and again Daniel stepping in front of Aethera, refusing to move. People had gathered in the square, holding banners that read "Let her live" and "Listen to the warning." Daniel sat at the long table, his hands clasped tightly. Every few minutes, he glanced at Aethera. She remained calm, though her large eyes studied everything around her. She could not understand all the words, but she understood the tension. Finally, the heavy wooden doors opened. The judges entered and took their seats. The lead judge, an older woman with silver hair, cleared her throat. "This court has reviewed the evidence, the translations, and the events of this morning," she said, her voice carrying through the room. "We have also considered the public response. Our decision must serve both justice and the safety of this planet." Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. The judge continued, "Captain Aethera will not be executed. She will be placed under formal diplomatic protection as a representative of her people. Furthermore, she will be allowed to assist our scientists and military in preparing for the threat she has described." A wave of relief spread through the room. People began to clap quietly, the sound growing louder until it filled the chamber. Daniel exhaled slowly, his shoulders finally relaxing. He turned to Aethera. "You're free," he said, even though he knew she could not understand the exact words. But she seemed to understand the tone. Her eyes softened, and she placed her hand large and strong briefly on his shoulder. The judge was still speaking. "This council will assign a team to verify the information brought by Captain Aethera. We must be prepared for the possibility of contact with hostile forces. Our planet's survival may depend on the knowledge she carries." The military officials in the room did not look pleased, but they could not argue with the decision in front of so many witnesses. When the session ended, Daniel, Aethera, and the technician were escorted outside. The crowd in the square erupted into cheers. Devices were raised high to capture the moment. Some people called Daniel's name, others called out in welcome to Aethera. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Aethera stepped forward without hesitation. She looked across the crowd, her expression unreadable, then gave a slow nod. The crowd cheered even louder. The technician leaned close to Daniel. "Looks like you just made history." "I didn't do it alone," Daniel replied, glancing at Aethera. "We all did." Over the next days, Aethera was moved to a secure diplomatic residence, not a prison cell. Scientists began meeting with her daily, using translation tools to slowly learn her language. Daniel was part of the process, helping to bridge the gap. Aethera explained what had destroyed her world, a massive fleet of machines that consumed everything in their path. She called them the Harvori. They had no interest in peace, only in resources. Her ship had been one of many scouts sent to find allies before it was too late. The information she provided shocked Earth's leaders. Satellite networks were adjusted to search the far edges of the solar system. Early warning systems were upgraded. Plans were drawn up for united planetary defense. One evening, After a long day of translation work, Daniel found himself sitting with Aethera in the residence's courtyard. The sky above was clear, the stars bright. "You risk much for me," she said in slow, careful English. The language was still new to her, but each word carried weight. Daniel smiled faintly. "You risk more for us. Seems fair." She looked up at the stars, her gaze distant. "My people are gone, but perhaps your people will not share our fate." Daniel followed her gaze. "Not if we can help it." In the weeks that followed, public opinion shifted. Where there had been fear, there was now curiosity. Artists painted murals of Aethera alongside human astronauts. Schools taught children about the Alindra and the importance of listening before judging. But not everyone was convinced. There were still voices calling her presence a risk, warning that her information could be a trick. Daniel knew trust was fragile. Then, 1 month after the trial, the first signal came. Deep space listening posts detected faint transmissions from far beyond Pluto signals that matched the patterns Aethera had described. The Harvori were real, and they were coming. The world changed overnight. Countries that had not spoken in decades began sharing data. Defense projects doubled in speed. And through it all, Aethera stood beside Earth's leaders, offering strategies her people had once used in their own desperate fight. Daniel knew the danger was real, but he also knew something else. Without her, they would never have been ready. And all, one night, as they worked late in the planning chamber, Aethera spoke quietly. "Daniel, when the day comes, and they are here, you must not stand in front of me again. You must stand with me." Daniel met her gaze and nodded. "Always." And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was no longer just about saving her, it was about saving them all.